Thank you for tuning in once again to his Vine and Fig Tree podcast. My name is Kurt Olson. I'm your host. Having a conversation again with my son Samuel. Um, and one of the topics we want to talk about is conservative media. There's some chaos involved in it, literally as we speak. Um, this is being taped on the afternoon of the 30th. And about 24 hours ago, chaos started unfolding with the Daily Wire. Now, for those of you unaware of the Daily Wire, this is the outfit. Let's name some of the names.
Ben
Go ahead.
Shapiro, Matt Walsh,
Michael
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 Knowles,
Knowles.
Jordan Peterson is now part of them.
Uh, in the past, Candace Owens. In the past, Brett
Brett
Cooper.
Cooper, yeah.
Um, so, and these are some names that some people might be familiar with. But sometime on Saturday, the 29th, chaos started unfolding. I'm just going to read, these are very short little uh, posts on X that started late morning yesterday. Scoop: the implosion at the Daily Wire is accelerating. What started with Jeremy Boring, and Jeremy Boring is
One of the CEOs.
the CEO. He brought them the Hershey candy bar
Yeah.
to kind of make fun of the whole woke pronoun stuff, and Jeremy's razors, some other things that he did, and some people might have followed him on social media. But again, this is late yesterday morning. Scoop: the implosion at the Daily Wire is accelerating. What started with Jeffrey Boring stepping down has now spiraled into mass layoffs and another firing of a senior executive, Alyssa Cordova, the vice president of public relations. The Daily Wire just fired Alyssa Cordova, their VP of public relations. And according to sources, she was Jeremy's minion. One was responsible for crafting the company's aggressive and paranoid media strategy. Cordova allegedly stalked former employees online, kept folders of clipped videos of their enemies, helped wage internal vendettas under the guise of PR. One source: the disaster of their PR strategy over the last year was cooked up between Jeremy and Alyssa. And one of the casualties of some of the chaos that is unfolding there right now is the kids division um, is being shuttered, and that was roughly a quarter of the company. Now, with all of that having happened, Ben Shapiro landed on Megyn Kelly's podcast yesterday, and he was explaining the Daily Wire's finances are just fine. This gets to some issues that Sam and I have occasionally talked about, and we want to go into a little more detail on with folks that watch this podcast. So there's this stream of people in the conservative media who may not always be what they're cracked up to be.
Yeah.
Shed some light if you can.
I mean, uh, to maybe trigger some people who are Trump voters, our current president of the United States is a perfect example. Someone who many conservatives chalk up as a conservative, a Republican, yet a lot of the values that he has, even policies that he has, um, do not support that at all. Um, I mean, the fact that he's, you know, not allowing the legislator to be the legislative body and using executive
Orders
orders.
to basically do everything.
That is a perfect example of failed government, and just not understanding the functions of government and not living up to the expectations of what they claim to be,
Right, and certainly,
amongst others.
and certainly how the founders designed it to be.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll get to that here in a little bit as well. Um, so one of the people that I have mentioned on my podcast, probably about maybe a month ago or so, was something by a guy by the name of John Root, and he's a guy on Instagram and X and a few other places that does a lot of things with Christians in athletics. You'll see a lot right now, especially with college athletics going on.
Yep.
He's done some stuff with the wrestling tournament for the NCAA, college basketball. He did a lot during the college football season,
Yeah.
especially the playoffs.
Yep.
He'll do some things with Sports Spectrum as well.
Mm-hmm.
And John Root was a guy who's been very active with Turning Points USA in the past. And I don't know if that's his podcast or what he does is somehow interconnected with them still. I'm not sure. The point is this. John Root was making the case not too long ago, I might add, that there are people in the conservative media who are not always who they say they are. And this came at a time when, there was someone connected to, what was her name? Was it Ashley? Someone. Apparently, she had come out because a story was happening in one of the British tabloids. And she was basically saying, I have a 5-month-old son, and the dad is Elon Musk. And John Root used that as a catalyst to basically say he's familiar with a lot of people in Talking Point USA or Turning Point USA and several other conservative media organizations. And they will talk all day long about traditional values, the nuclear family, and a variety of other things that you would think that is just normal part of conservative ideas. And the next thing you know, these people aren't who they claim to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like just as we've seen in the church where there's been a variety of scandals and exposure of people over time and even going on even now, it's almost like God's doing the same thing in other circles. He's peeling back onions where something is sitting underneath that doesn't look right. And it's like, who can you trust? Who can you trust? I mean, I think we've both kind of run into this where there are these personalities that become very dynamic,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
and they become personalities that you want to follow
Yeah.
because they're outspoken and they're very forthright in how they approach things. And but even if they're conservative, you got to just be alert. That doesn't mean what they're saying is necessarily biblical. Conservative in the Bible, you would think, and many times might go together, but that's not always the case. And we've seen, um, what are some of the personalities? Candace Owens.
Oh my gosh, yes.
She had the dust up with Ben Shapiro after the October 7
Yeah.
attacks with
Her
Hamas.
her anti-Semitic comments. Yeah.
Yep, and she's had some anti-Semitic comments, and she all but was pushed aside there at the Daily Wire, and she's now doing her own thing. And Candace Owens is just one of people who you're like, are they truly committed to conservative ideals,
Mm-hmm.
or are they in it just for the money?
For money.
Are they grifting? Are they? Is there a motive there that is not necessarily on the up and up.
Or it's just like their life doesn't necessarily match it. It's not necessarily they're in it for money. I'm thinking of like um who is it? Mark Rubin, John
Dave
Rubin,
Rubin?
Dave Rubin, who's a homosexual and talks about conservative values all the time. And I'm like,
Exactly. He's
that's not conservative.
this guy is another voice on the right. And while you would expect the average homosexual to be more
Uh,
left of
oh my
center,
gosh, way left.
I mean, literally driving the forces of all of the alphabet mafia stuff we see going on, you will occasionally see someone who is conservative, at least in their political philosophy, and they'll talk about how they're a homosexual. So it's not necessarily
I
unusual.
mean, you have the Instagram account Gays Against Groomers.
Yeah,
They talk a lot about these are homosexuals who are against the grooming of children into
transgenderism, other
all the
stuff.
stuff that goes on with it.
Right,
But they personally are part of that group.
right, exactly. And if people spend time on social media, you come across all kinds of names. And there are names on the right or right of center that, oh, follow this person, this person, this person. And I'm just saying, you got to be careful. You have to do some homework. And are the things that they say matching up with the ideals that you hold as valuable as someone who is a Christian, conservative, or both?
And do they personally live it?
Do they live it? And so, I mean, we could talk about some other personalities. I'm personally reading a book right now called Against the Waves. It's a guy by the name of John Harris who is in Christian circles who I've gotten a little familiar with more in recent weeks and months. And the book's a good read. I'll probably talk more about some of the ideas in that when I'm finished with it. I'm kind of like more of a like a third or a quarter of the way through. So, but and he talks about even some of this stuff. But just be careful. I mean, because I think a lot of people would have expected, oh, Daily Wire's just fine. It's financially secure. They're in Tennessee. They got no income taxes they're paying down there, the whole 9 yards. And then this happens. And I don't know Jeremy Boring. All I knew of him was his persona that he let out through the Daily Wire channel and some other things. But you got to be careful. You just got to be careful.
Mm-hmm.
You have to. You have to. There's just. I mean, and this automatically rolls over into the politics as well because there's all kinds of politicians who talk a good game, and that's all it is. It's a lot of words. I mean, Sam's mentioned Trump, but there are others on the
Oh
right.
my gosh, yes.
There are people who just
Matt
they
Gaetz. Matt Gaetz.
and
Um,
they say the right stuff, and they'll say the things that'll tickle your ears, but yeah, what is really there under the surface?
mhm.
So just be careful. And the segue here is a little challenging, although not completely challenging, but because the other thing we wanted to talk about was political parties. I mean, I've had a little bit of a transformation myself in like the last 10 years or so. And I do regard myself as politically homeless. I'd never be a Democrat. I mean, I mean, it, I mean, there's. they don't live in reality. This is a party that they continue to double down on the things that have harmed them. This last election and other things, and make no mistake, there's going to be an emotional energy on the left that they're going to try to use to try to do some things in the midterm election in 2028
Hmm.
that are basically reactions to what Trump is doing.
Hmm.
But um but I'm politically homeless. And and I shared something on the podcast this past week, and because I'm getting concerned about the rhetoric I'm hearing overseas and here in the United States of just some real harsh rhetoric between us and our allies, or our allies toward us. And I don't think that ends well for anybody. And one of the criticisms they have is, oh, you only have two political parties. Well, they have a totally different system in
Well,
Europe.
yeah, it's democracy.
Yeah,
It's not
it's majority rule,
yeah, it's not equally
where the rights of
y-
the minority are also
yeah, accounted for.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. And
Yeah.
yeah, and how many times do we run across a European government? I mean, the last election they had in Sweden, they had to have like 3 votes. I mean, oh, okay, yeah, they have more of a right of center, rather than a classic socialist leadership of their country right now.
Yeah.
But
That's
still,
also because of cultural things that are going on.
exactly.
Not
And guys, folks, where we've been dealing with immigration primarily from Mexico and Central America, their immigration problem is
is
from the
Africa
Middle East
and Africa.
and Africa. And when you hear things in lead ups to European elections, whether it's England, France, Germany,
Sweden.
name the European country, the countries that would be considered our allies in Western Europe.
I
I
would
mean,
say the more popular ones because I can think of a couple countries that are allies of ours they're not on that list, like Czech Republic
right, right,
and
right,
Poland and
right,
Hungary and a couple others.
right. But
They don't take immigrants in.
right,
They've refused
but
to.
a lot of those Western allies in Europe, they have,
Yeah.
and they're dealing with eh, JD Vance when he was over in Europe not too long ago. He was talking about how uh, they're engaging in a cultural suicide because the things that that made England what it is, which is Christianity.
Hmm.
I mean, you can go back to what is it? We go back to the Enlightenment with some of even the battles they had there between
Way before.
okay,
Way before that. It was
the
shortly after the Anglo-Saxons arrived there. Because the
you,
Anglo-Saxons were a pagan group that transformed to Christian. Well, Catholicism, but
right, but
Christianity.
you eventually have those Catholic Protestant fights
Yeah.
breaking out in multiple countries in Europe. And Christianity has been a part of their foundation from the very
Or
beginning.
some form of
Oh,
Christianity.
exactly, some form of it. Whether it's the Anglicans, whether it's Roman Catholics, whether it's
Some other
Lutherans,
Yeah.
whoever
Yeah.
it is, it's part of who they are, and or has been a part of who they are, and their countries are shells of their former selves, and
Well, their biggest problem is that well, part of it's their form of government,
okay,
but part of it is also the fact that the majority of these people that are leading these kind of things tend to lean really left, which
right,
is why we've seen the crash in our country, which is why they're seeing the crash in their country.
and
Their political philosophies and ideologies are all in the leftist momentum.
And just like we had a reaction to that in our country last November, there are countries in
Yeah.
Europe
Yep.
that are having reactions to that. Now, it didn't happen in France and it didn't happen in England, but you've seen it in Italy. You've seen it in parts of Scandinavia.
Oh my
You've
gosh,
seen it,
yes.
some of the countries that Sam mentioned not too long ago, the Czech
Well,
Republic, Hungary,
they were there from the beginning, though.
and
Switzerland.
Switzerland, the Netherlands.
Hmm.
These are countries that have had reactions to things that are happening in their midst,
Hmm.
because the big countries of France, England, Germany, they get a lot of the attention. In Italy, they get a lot of the attention just because of their size. But the immigration issue from the Middle East and Africa is affecting them too. And so, political parties,
Yeah.
a lot of people would say you got to have them. A lot of people would say
Yeah.
they're necessary evils, and which has brought us to the point where you vote for the lesser of two evils. At least that's a lot of the rhetoric you hear right of center.
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, George Washington has a quote. Share it with people.
Well, first and foremost, George Washington, obviously our first president, was the only president we've had that was never belonged to a political party, even though he had political philosophies that leaned more federalist. He never officially joined the party, and the Federalists would have eventually created the Republican Party. Um, he's the only president we've had that has never been a part of a political party. And in his farewell address, one of the quotes he had was this: "However, the political parties may now and then answer popular ends, they are likely in the course of time and things to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reign of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which have lifted them to unjust dominion."
And what Washington is getting at there, folks, and this is the brilliance of our founding fathers, they understood human nature. They understood that human beings are born selfish and sinful. And in any entity, this is business, entertainment, sports, the thing that keeps people grounded is their spiritual life, or you would think it should. It keeps them from thinking too highly of themselves. It keeps them from being too arrogant when they talk publicly about themselves, or others are talking about them and they're responding to it. But Washington's getting to the fact that because we are selfish human beings and there is something wrong with human nature, when political parties establish themselves, people like that will sneak in and start doing things, and can start doing things. And I mean, we have a lot of evidence to suggest
I mean,
just in our
I
country.
mean, and I'm thinking of our current president is a. You're gonna find this out. I don't like our current president, but um, he is a perfect example of someone who has his own ambitions. He has his own motivations uh, for being president um, that aren't necessarily for the interests of the country. Um, and
Let me try to play devil's advocate to that right now.
okay,
Okay, so when he says America first, and we do what is best for America first.
yeah,
Now, there are people who are listening to this or could listen to this, and they're saying, well, if it's America first, it's in the best interest of the country. Why would you say what you're saying?
because there is no uh, philosophy or ideology that is directing him in where he wants or what that should look like. It's whatever pops up in his head is the best idea. This whole thing with Greenland right now is pretty popular, which I think is absolutely stupid, because there's no market in Greenland. There's a reason why the population of Greenland is
About 50, what is it, 56,
56.
57, 58, 8,000 people?
That's like the size of a small town or a
Right.
couple towns that live near
Yeah.
each other.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
it doesn't even meet this criteria of a large major city.
No, absolutely not. Because for a lot of people across this country, Buffalo is a small city.
Yeah.
Green Bay, which has an NFL franchise, is a small city.
Yeah.
Um,
They're not even 1 million people.
exactly. They're not.
They're
They
not 500,000.
they're not even a half a million people. So political parties, I think we as Americans have just come to accept them as a necessary evil,
Yeah.
and things like something that George Washington said almost 250 years ago gets probably not nearly as enough attention as it probably should,
Yeah.
as we are digging through the chaos of, well, what does MAGA look like? And what does the new Democratic Party look like?
Yeah.
I mean, right now that's a party that is in just they're in chaos. They have Bernie Sanders and AOC going on tour, attempting to rally the forces of the left, and like socialism helped them out last November.
When does it help anybody out?
Exactly. They've helped themselves out.
Well, them in government, but
Yeah,
not
yeah,
everybody else.
exactly. Them in government, they profit a tremendous amount.
Many of those countries don't exist or are some of the poorest countries on
Countries
the
on the
planet.
planet, yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah. So, I, and we have a pocket of Americans right now who do regard themselves as politically homeless, because they're people who tend to be right of center, at least in some of their political philosophy, but they don't like what the GOP has done, whether it's the January 6th stuff, and that's a totally
or
separate issue,
Trump
or
or
things
whatever.
regarding Trump, and it could be any number of things.
Okay.
And then you have the left, and you're like,
That's just Wackoville.
you've got the alphabet mafia over there, and all they're interested in right now.
It's emotion.
Yes, they react emotionally to literally everything, from canceling someone online to doxing someone online to
You hurt my feelings.
you hurt my feelings. Guess what I'm going to have? I'm going to have the SWAT team in your hometown come to your house.
To you arrested a black person because he's black when he was probably doing drugs or something else.
So, anyways, I mean, this is the kind of stuff that has dominated the left of center for quite a while now. I mean, we've seen the Black Lives Matter movement just kind of disintegrate under, talk about grifters,
Yeah.
people who used that moniker and that name only to profit themselves.
Yep.
And there are stories out there of the people who founded BLM, and these people,
Did it to get rich.
they did it to get rich.
They never put it back into black communities.
And they never did it toward doing something benevolent for inner cities at all.
I saw a story that some of the founders now have like multi-million-dollar homes.
Yeah. And so it was and all those companies that reacted to the George Floyd situation in Minneapolis, and all the riots that happened during COVID, no less. For what? For what? People just did things to make money.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is a perfect time to kind of end this segment here, as this podcast is about, yes, freedom, his vine and fig tree. Speaking of George Washington, a phrase that he used frequently in his writings. But this is also a time, especially for Christians. Exodus 18:21. I've said it before. I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to keep saying it till I'm blue
I
in the
mean,
face.
I'm.
There's four things Jethro told his son-in-law Moses. You need people who are able. You need people who fear God,
Mm-hmm.
love the truth, and hate dishonest gain.
Mm-hmm.
Character. Basic
Yeah.
character. And
Yeah.
character isn't do-goodism. Do-goodism is very different from genuine character, which is rooted spiritually in the fear of God, loving the truth, and
And it's just the way you conduct yourself. It's who you are on an everyday basis. It's
and
not. It's not a front. It's not when
yeah,
you're in front of rich people or people who are well. It is who you are every day.
yes, and you develop a reputation for being a straight shooter, no matter who the audience is, whether it is you're with coworkers, you're with neighbors, you're with people in your church, you're with people at your school, you're with people, whatever the setting is, you're a straight
I
shooter.
mean,
What you say is what you mean.
this is one of the reasons why George Washington was elected in the first place. Okay, he had some governmental roles in the early Continental Congress that was beginning to form right before the American Revolution. Obviously, he was the commander in charge during the American
Right?
Revolution. But this is a guy who owned a farm, who didn't go seek higher education. He didn't go to college. This is a man who um, was practical. His character spoke for himself, and this is the reason why he was unanimously picked three different times. By the way,
And the third time, he basically rejected serving a third time.
yeah,
Yeah.
because of his character, he developed himself as someone who was reliable and was practical. He was the common folk. He gained popularity because of that, and he thought that way.
Right. And that was a time when you didn't have social media.
Yeah,
You didn't have broadcast media or cable news networks,
it was just the newspaper.
and you had newspapers and word of mouth.
Yep.
And all of these communities that were affected by the Revolutionary War
Which was
probably had word of mouth that came back to people. Oh, Washington is this way. You can trust this guy because I saw him in action. So, anyways, I'd love to see our country get back to a point where character was
yeah.
what was part of the conversation.
Hmm.
We have all of these trivial conversations in elections in this country about, oh, it's the horse race and who's winning and who's not, and what's this poll saying, what this poll saying, and it's a waste of your time.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
and and go ahead.
well, going back to, just getting back to our foundational roots. I mean, going back to lesser of two evils. That is not a biblical argument. You would
No.
never ever see that in
Scripture.
Scripture.
Okay.
It is always the righteous
You do the
person.
right and just thing. I mean, you think of Solomon, where the two moms are fighting over the baby. Oh, I got an idea.
Let's just split it in half.
Yeah, let's split the baby in half. And now you know who the real mom is. The mom who steps away because that life of that child she cared about.
I mean, this
So,
is part of the reason why David was elected. He was a man after God's own heart, or not elected,
but
appointed
picked,
as king
right?
because Saul uh, did his own thing and didn't necessarily have a heart that was focused on doing what God wanted him to do. So God said, "Okay, I'm going to remove you." And so This is why David has kind of the is kind of picked to be the figure that the future Messiah would come through, and kind of the legend in Israel.
Right. Even today,
Yeah.
people will talk about David. But anyways, um, so that's it for this more special edition of this podcast. And until next time, God bless and goodbye.